We personally have a very strict diet called macrobiotic, which makes you high as a kite, folks, and no paranoia. And well, very little. And the whole diet is based around not eating food with any kind of artificial colouring, chemical or anything in. And until the people who put the chemicals into all our food and water change their minds, or we make it so they have to, the thing is to read everything you eat. Just read every packet and see how much dope they're putting in there. They're talking about drug problem. You want to see what you're eating every morning. Just every packet's full of government-sponsored chemical colouring. Everything's grown with drugs. If you take as much trouble over your food as you do over your clothes, then you can find out where you can buy food that hasn't been touched by chemical. And then it's like having a car and putting the worst kind of petrol in, or trying to run it on sort of Vaseline. It doesn't run too well, and if you really get your machine ticking over with the right food, it really outpaces anything around.
We got up and went into the sitting room and just chatting, and then John said, we've really got to go, we don't want to miss them. And the dentist said, you can't possibly leave yet. But John said, why? And he said, because you've just had LSD.
Uh-oh.
John freaked out because he understood what it was.
Yeah.
George and I and Cynthia, no idea, never heard of it, didn't know why John was getting so angry. And anyway, that was it. John said, right, we're definitely leaving. So we left and we got into our little Mini. I can't tell you what it's like. I don't know if you've ever taken a drug as strong as that, but you become so enormous in your mind.
Yeah.
And so 4 people kept growing and growing in this tiny little Mini. You know, it was surreal and it was hallucinogenic. So it was very scary.
Yeah.
And in fact, incredibly irresponsible of the dentist.
Oh, of course, yeah.
To have given us this, and knowing George was driving too.
I just noticed I suddenly got so scared on the mic, you know. I said, what was it, you know? I said, I feel ill. I thought I felt ill, and I thought it was going cracked, you know. And then I said, I must get some air. And they all took me upstairs on the roof, and George Martin was looking at me funny, you know. And then it dawned on me, I must have taken acid. And I said, well, I can't go on, I have to go. So I just said, you'll have to do it, I'll just stay in and watch. And I was just, you know, very nervous and just watching them all. Saying, is it all right? And they were saying, yeah, you know, all being very kind. And I said, yes, it's all right. And I said, are you sure it's all right? And I said, all right, you know, and they carried on making a record. In LA, Paul felt very out of it because we were all a bit slightly cruel, you know, so we're taking it in your name. But we kept seeing him, you know. And we couldn't eat our food, you know. I just couldn't manage it. We're picking it up with the hands, and we're hey, fucking them. There's all these people sort of serving us in the house and that, and we're just sort of knocking it on the floor and then, like that. And it was a long time before Paul took it, and then there was the big announcement. George was pretty heavy. I mean, we're probably both the most cracked, you know. I think Paul's a bit more stable than George and I. Yeah. No, but in Hard Day's Night, I was on pills. That's drugs, you know, that's bigger drugs than pot. I've been on pills since I was 17. Since I became a musician, the only way to survive in Hamburg, to play 8 hours a night, was to take pills. Like the waiters gave you the pills and drink. I was fucking dropped down drunk in art school. I was a pill addict until just before Hell, where we had turned onto pot and we dropped drink. Simple as that. I've always needed a drug to survive. The others too, but I always had more, you know. I always more of everything because I'm more crazy.
Episode 49 of Glass Onion on John Lennon. And this is Riding So High, The Beatles and Drugs, part 1 of 2. So my original plan with this was to do John Lennon and drugs, but since I was using the book Riding So High, and I thought it's such a good book that I'd like to do a review of it. The book is written by Joe Gooden, who also runs the BeatlesBible.com, an indispensable resource for Beatle information. Particularly I use it a lot for information about the songs and who played what and everything, although as we discussed later, and we've discussed many times, that's an ongoing concern. That story keeps changing. But anyway, before I describe the book and talk about my guest today, let's just go through those clips. So the first one, I don't know when this was actually from. I'm imagining it maybe from 1980. John talking about drugs in food, which is a topic that we get onto today. And it's one that I talk about to people all the time because I went on a raw diet about 10 years ago, and I started studying food and nutrition and what goes into our food, and I was frankly horrified. I thought I'm never going to eat again if I keep studying this. So all I'm going to say about that is just that's definitely an area for study. So John was a bit ahead of his time there. I think I heard from somewhere that he used to listen to the Gary Null radio show, and I listened to that as well in podcast form. And Gary Null's sort of mixture of nutrition advice and how the world works kind of stuff, you know, about politics and things like that. Then we had Patty Boyd talking about the dental experience, the first time John and George and their wives took LSD. That was covered actually in the last episode on 1965, but I thought you might want to hear Patty's version of it. Some of the other clips, there was Paul with Howard Stern talking about the famous occasion in 1967 while they were recording Sgt. Pepper that John took acid by mistake while they were doing the vocals for Getting Better. And there is a theory, actually, you heard John talking about how nervous he was. I mean, that may have been just purely because of taking LSD in the recording studio with, I guess he was comfortable with Paul, George and Ringo, but, you know, George Martin, as you heard there, was pretty straight in that regard, and then all the other white coats in EMI wouldn't have known about that. But one of the things is that obviously there's a line, I used to be cruel to my woman, I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved. So there is the theory that singing that line as well may have caused John to freak out, you know, thinking about his violent past while on acid. Paul, of course, tells the story in his naturally cheery, optimistic way. Then John mentions LA. That was the second time they took acid, and the first time they took it willingly, and Paul didn't partake and the other Beatles did, so that was what he was referring to. I think we talk about that later. And then John talking about drugs in general, with his typical sort of mixture of bad memory and exaggeration. He said, I was 17 when I started taking pills. I don't think that was the case. In fact, he said 15 first of all, then corrected it to 17. But I think the central thing there was he said, you know, I've always needed a drug to survive. And as you will hear in today's conversation, I would argue that, in fact, we all need drugs to survive, perhaps just to survive the stresses of, you know, modern living. I mean, people always say this is the best time to be alive, but there is also a lot of problems created by modern life that didn't exist before. And one of the theories, notably by Chris Ryan, the author of Civilized to Death, is that a lot of the problems that modern technology is solving are ones that are created by modern life anyway. Anyway, the point I'm getting to, during this conversation, we do talk a lot about legal drugs and about we are all taking drugs, sometimes willingly, sometimes not, you know, if you think of the drugs in the food. So let's get on to today's talk. So, yeah, the book is Riding So High, The Beatles and Drugs. I first read this a couple of years ago and I was absolutely blown away by it. It's a fantastic book. And I am sending this link to Joe Gooden, so hopefully Joe's listening to this. So just want to say, you know, well done. Fantastic book. My guest today is Tom Hunyady. He's someone I've been aware of for a while. We have this lovely Beatles community online and they're all very friendly and nice. And Tom is the host of Two Legs, which is a Paul McCartney podcast, and he's also one of the co-hosts of Talk More Talk. He will talk more talk about that in a second, so I'll leave that to him. There's a number of other clips included in this show. They are becoming a popular part of the show, as I said. Got another message about them today saying I really enjoy the variety. You will hear later from, some of the Beatles as normal, and then Joe Rogan, whose podcast is becoming very, very popular, with Ted Nugent. Bill Hicks, the late great stand-up comedian. And I think some of the clips, you'll know what they are because we're talking about that topic just before. So we actually go chapter by chapter through the book. And in this part, we deal with illegal drugs. So we do tobacco, alcohol, etc. And then we talk about pot and we talk about LSD. Obviously, those clips at the beginning there was quite heavy on the LSD angle. And that's the longest chapter in this book and very, very interesting. And I read a couple of bits from that chapter, as you'll hear later. The final chapter that we deal with in this part of the talk is the sad story of Brian Epstein. I said Epstein that time. I seem to be saying Epstein all the other times. Anyway, and then just to break it up, we also talk about how drugs, including alcohol, have been the inspiration for lots of songs and films. So plenty to get your teeth into. So anyway, that's enough for me. I'll let you get on with listening to this, and I'll be back on the other side with a few words. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. This is Glass Onion on John Lennon. I'm delighted to have with me Tom Hunyady, Beatles podcaster extraordinaire. Come on, agree with me. Come on.
Okay, fine.
Tom, how are you doing today?
Unexperienced. I'm great. Thank you for having me here.
You're very welcome. Tell us about your podcast, first of all.
Thank you. Yeah, well, Two Legs was Paul McCartney-centric, solo Paul McCartney-centric podcast. Really just came out as frustration with listening to other podcasts that are mainly Beatles, things we said today, something about the Beatles, stuff like that, Fat Four, Free for All. They're mainly Beatle podcasts. They'll dig into the solo stuff from time to time, but a couple years after listening to those podcasts, I was really thinking, okay, maybe we should. I really wish there was, something out there that just dealt with solo Beatles, and there was. I think Jude Kessler had a John Lennon one for a little while.
She did, yeah.
And I thought Paul McCartney, would be perfect because one, when we started the show, I think it was like 46 years of solo years. I mean, so many it's more than just the music. So many different topics that you can talk about with Paul, and we thought that would be a great place to start. Now, having said that, when we started, we didn't realize that three other people had the same idea, So a month or two after we got the show going, we discovered that there was three other Paul McCartney shows as well. So,
are they anyone you know? Are they anyone you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Sam Wiles over there by you. I mean, he does the Paul or Nothing show, and we talk often. We've both been on each other's shows. I don't know the Take It Away guys. And then there was, I think, All Paul, or something like that. And I think that was a married couple that were doing that show, and I don't think they're doing that anymore. But it's been a lot of fun. I mean, you've got all these books that have been collecting over the years, and doing this podcast, really put a match under my ass to read all of these books finally. And we have a great success of getting a lot of authors on, a lot of great people like Paul Denore, who had that conversation with McCartney book that's really good. We've had a lot of different people on to talk about. We even had Jeffrey Giuliano, the famous author, reach out to me to want to be on the show, and I just thought, maybe. We'll pass on that one.
Oh, so you haven't had him on, though?
I just thought, I had a bad experience with writer, I forgot the magazine, Musician magazine. His name's Vic Garbarini, and he did the McCartney interview album from 1980. I was on the phone with him for 8 hours, and I just felt like this was going to be the same situation where he was just going to go off on a tangent, just go off in a million different places. And I just didn't want to deal with that. And I really, he said he wanted to clear the air, and I didn't want to deal with that.
Did you record the 8 hours on the phone?
Yeah, I recorded the 8 hours. The call dropped twice, so it's in 3 segments. We put out the first part a couple years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. It's done well. However, parts 2 and parts 3 are just really unplayable because the conversations just go in so many different directions that you would be editing for hours on end, to try to put together a show. So unfortunately, we haven't had success, putting parts 2 and 3 out. So,
oh God.
It was definitely a learning experience for me. I feel like I'm a better interviewer because of that experience. So yeah, so Two Legs came from that. And then while doing Two Legs, meeting or getting to have, Ken Michaels, Gil Toole, Kenneth Womack on the show. And then more frustration going, okay, well, how come there's not a George Harrison podcast out there? How come there's not a new John Lennon podcast out there? Because I think the Talk More Talk show started before Glass Onion started. I'm not 100% sure.
I started last February. Yeah,
okay,
I think it was already going, yeah.
Right. Our first show was on Egypt Station, so that would be September of 18, I believe.
Yeah.
But anyways, it was just more or less, okay, I know Ken Michaels loves solo Beatles. I know Kid O'Toole loves solo Beatles. I know I love solo Beatles, and then from our meetings there, Kit suggested Kenneth Womack, and that was a great suggestion. I didn't realize that he was such a huge solo Beatles fan because he had done so much writing on just, Beatles. So when that suggestion came up, I said, okay, let's jump on it. So then we started from that. And lately, Ken Womack has just been so busy writing, traveling and writing. And so he hasn't been able to join us as much. So now we have a gentleman named Mean Mr. Mayo, which is his YouTube name. And we call him Joe Mayo. So and he's been a great addition. And he's a huge solo Beatles fan as well. So now we're, 2020? We got 50 years of all this, information that, needs to get out. It needs to be talked about. We just did a show on the 1978 Ringo Starr special,
Oh, yeah.
That things like that, they just don't get talked about. Should they get talked about? Yeah, I think they should,
Yeah, why not? I kind of found myself a niche as well. Like you said, the only John Lennon one I found was the John Lennon Hour. Those are actually still out there on iTunes.
Oh, cool. Do you remember how many episodes there were of that? By chance?
50 maybe.
Okay. All right. So enough out there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I've got to met Jude, and she's a wonderful woman. She's knees deep in her John Lennon biopic series. I think she just put out Volume 4 last year. And
she was on the show to talk about 1964.
Great, awesome. Yeah, we're gonna have her on Two Legs as well to do a kind of like an early days with the early friendship of John and Paul. So I'm looking forward to that later on. So
awesome. All right. Well, I'm experimenting in 2020 with getting to the point rather than when I first started. You know what it was, actually? There was a reason for it. When I first started, I wasn't confident that my conversations would have enough material, which is ridiculous for today because I'm showing Tom now, I've got 9 pages. It's just ridiculous. I'm not going to use it all. I'm just going to, cherry pick.
In our pre-show discussion for Talk More Talk, we're like, what if we don't have enough to say? We always have enough to say.
It's ridiculous, yeah.
Yes, it is.
You're always going to have enough to say.
Exactly.
So I kind of get to the point a bit quicker this year. Yeah. Anyway, so our topic today, this book is Riding So High, The Beatles and Drugs by Joe Gooden. He runs, of course, thebeatlesbible.com, doesn't he? Is that him or is that a group of people?
I've only noticed his name. I mean, I'm sure, with a website that size, you would have to have help from time to time. And, I hope he has help.
Yeah, it's great articles, and it's good on, like, who played what, because that's...
Yeah, and it's great information. Right. I mean, you find albums from time to time where, you'll have the musicians, but it won't break it down song by song. And I think, there's a lot of that on there, which is a big help.
Yeah, it's awesome. So our topic is drugs. And Tom and I have just found out from talking that we both made a joke. We both thought of a joke. My joke was that we're method podcasters and we've just had a tab of LSD.
Right.
So if things get weird in about half an hour, you'll know why.
Exactly, yeah. And then I was just thinking, we're gonna be talking about a lot of different drugs, and it's like, hey, why not try the drugs while we're talking about them?
Yeah, we got to get through a few legal ones first. So yeah, I've got way too many notes, honestly. So I'm just gonna cherry pick a few things.
Well, yeah, I think that's always the best thing to do is cherry pick it, because whenever you're talking about a book, I think it's best to probably cherry pick because you want to, have people go and read the book themselves. Yeah. In my opinion, especially if you're the author, you don't want to give too much away.
Not that Joe Gooden's paying us anything for this.
Right. He just wrote a damn good book.
He did, yeah. I'm going to send him this recording.
Oh, cool.
When it comes out, so I think...
Oh, boy. Well, I better be on my game then, huh?
All right, let's do it.
Yeah.
So really, before we go to the actual chapters of the book, the thing I really wanted to talk about, I think when people talk about drugs, particularly, I'm going to say older generations, I don't want to start by being really ageist, but I've had discussions with older people, first of all, they just think of drugs. They don't really differentiate between, for example, marijuana and heroin, which is obviously a huge difference. But also, I actually went to the lengths of looking for definitions of drugs. Mm-hmm. And the two I've got here is a substance that's used as a medicine. So that would be, like paracetamol, let's say, and then an illegal and often harmful substance that people take for pleasure.
Right.
So there's a couple of definitions, but then that's even problematic because what's harmful, is 9 coffees a day is fairly harmful.
Right, yeah. I mean, there's a little truth to both those definitions for legal drugs. I mean, you're doing it for pleasure. I'm drinking a Coca-Cola right now, which is caffeine, it's pleasure right now, and I think it's more of a mental thing than anything.
If you'd been drinking Coca-Cola 100 years ago, it would have had something else in it, as you know. Yeah.
Yes,
we'll get to
absolutely.
that. Yeah, so my kind of argument is that, I mean, I've got a list here of legal drugs, alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, sugar. Right. We call them E numbers in England. If you look at the junk food or biscuits or whatever, you'll see like lots of E chemicals. Mm-hmm. We call them E numbers, so preservatives and additives. And then you've got prescription drugs. And I'm guessing, have you seen the movie Trainspotting?
Oh, yeah. You can't be a 90s cinephile like I am without, seeing Trainspotting for sure.
There you go, yeah. I think it did something very well because there's a couple of famous lines. When he's describing how good heroin is, he says something like, I'll take the best orgasm you've ever had, times it by 100, and you're still nowhere near.
But the heroin experience, right?
Yeah, but of course, if you watch that film, obviously everything falls apart by the end. So they're not, they're doing a good thing of being realistic, but not advocating it. But the other thing in that is that he says, Renton, Ewan McGregor, says that, my mother in her socially acceptable way is also a drug addict.
Right.
Because she's got like a cabinet full of pills.
She's got a cabinet of Mother's Little Helpers, doesn't
Mother's
she?
Little Helpers, there you go, yeah. Very good. So, yeah, I think obviously people often want to stay away from drugs and the topic because it's illegal. But, of course, if you're in America in the 20s and 30s, then prohibition.
Right.
If you were a kid then, you'd grow up to think that alcohol was a
bad thing, absolutely. And there's a really great Ken Burns documentary on Prohibition that definitely recommend people watching. What did it do? I mean, it just caused more chaos, more police, more bus, more gangs, So, I mean, it may have done more harm than good.
Yeah, it just drives it underground, sets up a black market,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And, of course, the other thing we've got to remember is that drugs that are bought on the street, the illegal ones, they're of course cut with all sorts. I mean, that's no secret. That's out there, I mean, John and Yoko, in fact, in the book, their heroin dealer starts giving them baby powder. No, milk powder. Milk powder, wasn't it? He's probably doing them a favor in one sense, but...
Yeah, I'm probably doing them a favor, but, I know once we get to that heroin chapter 2, the fact that you could register yourself as a heroin addict and get this stuff.
My mind was blown by that chapter. Amazing. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that if perhaps there are countries like Scandinavian countries, for example, and it is easier for things to work there because they're smaller countries where they do have a more, treating drug addicts as patients rather than criminals.
Right. And I think there's some truth to that as well. I mean, I'm sure their attention when they first started doing drugs was not necessarily one of, a bad thing. I think some areas, I mean, here in the States, they're either born addicted or they have nothing to turn to. I lived in Chicago for 6 years and, you couldn't go a day or every other day listening to the news without some kind of gang shooting or gang-related drug bust or some kind in the south side of Chicago, So for some people, in parts of the country, it's a way of life, where others where you see these, rich kids who just do it just because they may be influenced by a rap song or something like that. And it's really interesting when you look at both aspects of it. You're rich, you're privileged, and some kids think that's a burden and they turn to drugs because, maybe their parents haven't been, paying attention to them enough or, they just felt isolated.
Well, of course, in England, our two main universities are Oxford and Cambridge. Mm-hmm. And the stats for things like suicides and drug addiction there is massive because of the pressure.
Right. Yeah. Pressure is a huge thing, especially, when you're the 16 to 20 year range.
Plus you're developing as well.
Absolutely. You're dealing with all sorts of, peer pressure and, pressure from school, pressure at home to, continue to do well and get out there and be successful.
But didn't you find one of the amazing things from this book is how you find, for example, in the heroin chapter, in the speed, when they're talking about speed as well, that was it Robert Fraser who's the one who kind of introduced Paul to a few things, including drugs?
Drugs. I think it was cocaine. I think he was really the only one that really did the coke or for any length of time. Pre-68. I think it was late 66 and into 67. And, you just find him being confident at that time. And, maybe it was the cocaine. I tend to think that it was because, he had a John Lennon in his back pocket,
As well, although if you look at the pictures of John Lennon during Sgt. Pepper, he doesn't seem to be totally there. I mean, he looks like a completely different person.
Right. And then, and you see these transformations throughout from 60 all the way up to 69. You see them skinny when they're in Hamburg because of, the Prellies and the Dexamil, then you see them kind of like a little heavier set, in 64, 65. Yeah. And it's all about bad diet. It's these drugs, they're either made to help you not eat, or you're with the cannabis, you're eating nonstop. Maybe
you get
sometimes.
Munchies.
Yes, exactly. And the munchies that you eat are probably not the best thing for you.
You go down to the all-night garage and you've got the sausage rolls and
right. And you read about how they're just eating, either like toast and beans, and which is one that I'm starting to appreciate more. I'm a chef, and I used to work a lot of concerts. I used to cater a ton of concerts out here in Arizona and Las Vegas and California. You meet a lot of English people, and then they want the toast and they want beans. It's pretty fascinating.
Well, you can post me some hash cakes. We'll sort that out at the end of the program.
Okay, yeah, very good.
No, actually, the point I was getting to was with Robert Fraser. He said something about lots of his lords and ladies are heroin addicts.
Right. Yeah.
We'll get to all this with coke and heroin and LSD. When they're in pill form and you get them prescribed and, they stick them in a bottle with a label on it, then it becomes a different thing, but it's still the same drug.
Right, exactly. You just don't have to feel guilty about it or hide it.
Yeah, that's it. But another thing that gets me is there's also a kind of hysterical reaction in kind of mainstream media, let's say, to even things like weed. I'll give you an example. Every now and again, it will come out in the news that one of our politicians smoked a joint when they were at university.
Right.
They're like 25 years early, and there'll be like a reaction like, "Oh, I don't trust this person anymore." Do you ever get anything like that? Do we know about?
Oh yeah, we got that with Bill Clinton back in the 90s.
Oh yeah,
his famous his puff but didn't inhale. Absolutely. So for him saying that he didn't inhale, that should make him more trustable.
He bought it, but he didn't.
He did, right. But yeah, you see stories like that, and it's becoming more and more, legal here in the States. It's here in Arizona, Las Vegas, California, states that I've worked in, Colorado. The hippies are finally getting what they wanted, 50 years ago.
I mean, do you ever watch Joe Rogan? Do you ever watch the videos of his podcast?
I do from time to time, and he somehow finds a way to incorporate weed on every show.
Yeah, well, he used to do it surreptitiously a few years ago. I mean, he'd obviously be doing it, but he'd never have it on the camera. But now it's legalized.
Right.
He just pulls out this big joint and passes it to like Elon Musk or someone.
Right. Yeah, and I love it when he's debating people that are against it, like he had Ted Nugent on a while back, and he's totally against that kind of thing. And it's just interesting to hear them debate back and forth. His experience and Ted Nugent's experience with the drug.
I believe you have the power. I think I have the power when I get on stage tonight. We put our fists together and chant James Brown and Wilson Pickett and Funk Brothers, and it's like the last wolves on an island, gnashing of teeth over the last bone and shard of flesh. It's an out-of-body, soaring above life itself experience that we have in us. I don't need anything.
I understand
it's in me.
I understand that, but you don't use anything. So you're talking from a place of non-experience when it comes to marijuana or mushrooms or any of these things.
But my 70 years, I'd say at least 55 of those years, from the beatniks to the hippies to the friends, and you got to meet this Wayne Kramer guy, MC5 Guitars, new book, the hard stuff. He and I were born the same time, same influences, Detroit, the swamps, the outdoors, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, Motown, James Brown. He started smoking dope. I didn't. And got heroin and the crack and then he prison and stealing and arrested. And I'm having the time of my life and he's like wallowing in a cesspool of dog shit. And I'm not knocking Wayne. I'm saying that he was courageous to write this book. It's a brilliant book. You're going to be consumed by his conversational writing of the MC5's ascension to the most authoritative powerhouse music I've ever witnessed in my life, to a bunch of dirtbags on the downward spiral because of drugs and alcohol.
I know that happens. It definitely happens, but it happens with everything. It happens with people that they eat too much food. It happens with people with gambling. It happens with a bunch of different things, but I think it's because of discipline. It's because they don't have a clear path. I think it's because they let themselves become self-indulgent and they let themselves be weak. What I'm saying is that I know a lot of people who use, whether it's psychedelics or they use marijuana, and they use it to enhance their perspective. It doesn't become the primary focus of their life. It doesn't consume their life. They don't allow it to consume their life. There's a whole other world of disciplined marijuana enthusiasts. I think marijuana is misunderstood because there's a lot of dummies in this world. If you get a group of 100 people, what are the odds that one of them is going to be a dummy? Fucking 100%.
Yeah.
Well, if you get a group of 100 people that use marijuana, the one loud fucking stupid one defines what marijuana users are. You see that fucking idiot who's pissing all over himself and falling down so high he can't walk, that's what you think of.
I'm absorbing and respecting and considering your words.
It can get away from you.
Yeah,
it can get away from you.
That's all I've ever seen.
But everything can get away from you. I think it's because these people that consume it, they don't have those other qualities. They don't have discipline and focus. They don't have respect for their body. See, the thing with especially in the jiu-jitsu community, it's super common. Marijuana is really, really, really common. Yeah, I mean, there's a show called High Rollers where these guys, they put together a jiu-jitsu tournament and everybody had to get high before they rolled. And you're talking like elite, world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts competing high on marijuana.
And that's got to be one of the highest forms of discipline available to us.
Yes, it's a very, very difficult
right there with the Cameron Hames mountain climbing, bow hunting, calling an elk in your lap. Yeah.
It's an intense, extremely difficult pursuit, and a lot of people do it under the influence of marijuana.
Getting back to your point with the whole trust thing, does that make somebody not trustworthy? Just because they smoked a joint and experiment because you did it, you probably did it. I mean, I know I did it in my 20s. I don't feel any shame for doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely part of that circle when I was young, and one of the things we used to like doing was like if we did smoke, we'd.
Wait a minute. So is this part of the show where we should light up right now?
Yeah. Where's my lighter? We haven't done alcohol yet. No, sorry.
Well, I've got my bottle right here. I'm ready.
One of the things we used to like doing was we'd go into town or whatever, and we'd be sitting on a bench and we'd watch people, people watching.
Right.
And when you are stoned, and I'm going to quote John Lennon here, from I'm Only Sleeping, running everywhere at such a speed till they find there's no need. And it's funny when you do watch, we did used to watch people, and we used to see the kind of really stressed look in their eyes, and while everybody's rushing around, and okay, we probably all have busy lives, but I don't think we get that much more done by rushing around than by going at a more measured pace.
Right, but then to turn that around, though, I mean, I'm sure there's people watching him, whether he was strung out or not, and just thinking to myself, oh my God, is that the way? Is that lifestyle any better than my hurry up lifestyle?
Oh, sure, yeah. And what you said earlier with the cocaine aspect of Sergeant Pepper, I think with someone fairly well balanced, and it seemed, even though Paul lost his mother, he seems to have been well balanced, which he puts down to his family. And he doesn't seem to have that same hurt or same bitterness that John had. I mean, obviously Paul still had his dad, so he did still have some of that family. And John didn't have that, and this is why this book is so fascinating, because it really, you kind of get to the core of a little bit of what Lennon, why he was so fascinated with these drugs, and then diving in head first, a lot of time. A sort of modern phrase is self-medicating.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
My argument is kind of that we're all doing that, basically.
One way or the other, whether it's a Coca-Cola that I'm doing right now or a bag of Doritos that I'll probably have later on.
Yeah, it's definitely some drugs in those, yeah.
Right.
Drugs, chemicals, medication, you just choose your definition.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
I
it.
mean, marijuana's not legal over there.
No,
is
it isn't, no.
Still, okay. Not even for medication purposes?
You know, because I haven't actually lived in England. Well, I moved back.
Okay.
I still don't know whether I'm staying here permanently or not. I mean,
Right.
real. No, I don't think so, no. We're behind
Okay.
America in that, yeah.
Okay.
But so when Paul's doing Pepper, I think maybe the Coke was just a little boost.
Maybe.
Because he wasn't so desperate for it, maybe like John Lennon. He didn't need so much, so it's just a little top up.
Right. I mean, he was already considered a workaholic before cocaine.
Yeah.
So I question why he felt the need to even need it, whether it was just to, experience a new drug, because, obviously they already experienced the pills, they already experienced the booze, and the cannabis, prior to. So he said something like it became too, what's the word that he described cocaine, too fashionable, I think it was.
Oh, yeah, he dropped
That's
it
why,
when everyone else started doing it.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the other thing about it is that I read this great book called Out of It by Stuart Walton. I'm going to recommend it. It's all about intoxication.
Okay.
Again, legal and illegal. Very, very balanced book as well, like this one is. And he makes the point that people have been changing their consciousness since like the dawn of man, and they talk about cannabis used by classical Greeks and Romans and maybe prehistoric Euro-Asian and African society.
Wow.
Prehistoric,
Prehistoric, right.
So I don't know if it's an instinct. It's hard to say, really. Why do we want to change our consciousness? Is life too boring without it? I want to kind of propose that rather than saying that these people are drug addicts and everyone else isn't, there's some kind of spectrum. You know what I mean?
Right.
What do you think could be done about drug overdosing in or out of the profession of music?
I think the basic thing nobody asks is why do people take drugs of any sort, from alcohol to aspros to hard drugs? And that question has to be resolved first before you think, well, what can we do for the poor drug addict? Why do we and you and anybody have to have these accessories to normal living to live? I mean, is there something wrong with society that's making us so pressurized that we cannot live in it without guarding ourselves against it? So it's that basic, the problem.
Communication.
I think if people are allowed to be a bit more free and express themselves, they wouldn't have to inhibit themselves by taking drugs to not be hurt. People take drugs and drink so as they don't feel what's going on around them. People are frightened of freedom. They think freedom, there'll be excesses. Of course there would be excess to an extent, and then it would settle down. And all forms of freedom will be the same as that. If people are allowed to be completely free, it will level out and people would be less inhibited and not be frightened of each other and wouldn't have to take drugs to prevent being hurt by each other.
In England, I will bet you that the average guy, middle-class guy in his 30s or 40s would have a beer, maybe not every day, or he'd have some bear in his fridge,
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? It's,
yeah, I mean, I've got...
Tom's showing us all his drugs.
Yeah. I had a few beers last night. It's a mindset too, because you get this beer, you find one that you really love. You find it, you're making excuses for drinking it. It's the flavor. You love the little buzz that it gives you. So. Those are my excuses, because I think it tastes great, and I love I've worked long hours. I mean, I've worked, 5-hour shifts. I work 24-hour shifts, and I still try to find a way to, unwind with the beer, and that's what does it for me.
Yeah. Oh, another one that came into my mind when I was, I was born in 75, so I was in my 20s. Are we around the same age?
I was born in 73.
73. Oh, okay. Yeah. Same era, yeah. Do you remember when Red Bull came out?
Oh, absolutely. That was great. I mean, I was drinking those things 4 or 5 at a time, per day. And I just remember after a while, when I would have one, I'd probably get like halfway through it, and all of a sudden my heart just felt like it was clamped. I couldn't raise my arm. The way my body felt from drinking that was not good.
Yeah, it's horrible. And I got into vodka and Red Bull when I used to go out.
Oh, really? You did those? Okay.
And of course, because the Red Bull more or less negates the taste of the vodka, you can hardly taste it. You can just go crazy.
There's a great Kids in the Hall skit called "Girl Drink Drunk." It reminds me of that. It's just a drink that is disguised with other flavors, so you really don't taste the booze.
Yeah, but I mean, I used to live in the Far East, Southeast Asia, and they had their Red Bull I mean, I only tried it a couple of times because I really went off Red Bull completely. But theirs is even stronger and more or less got amphetamines in it. I mean, again, there's degrees, I mean, Red Bull to me seems like a drug high.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how, we would grab that. And for a while, I think you could probably consider that an addiction. If that's what you want to, label drug as is, something that's addictive. And, I remember the first thing I had to have. I know some people, like, I'm not a coffee person myself. I'll do the energy drink. And finally, I had found one that works for me. But, those first few years, it was Red Bull like crazy.
Yeah. So we all kind of find a little balance, don't we? We have our little stimulant in the morning. And
Exactly. And then you find something throughout the day, too. It's just... It's just not that one thing, because that crash, I tell you, man, you get that sugar crash, and it's not a fun crash.
Yeah, you need to keep putting it off, you see.
Exactly.
All right. I just wanted to read a couple of things. There's some great stuff from the introduction in this book. I don't know if this is a direct quote or something I've written, but legal and illegal drugs were an intrinsic part of the Beatles' lives. For the most part, drugs provided the Beatles with stimulation, escape, or distractions from the pressures of performing and being in the public eye. And then on the back cover, this is a great quote. The acid pills and powders helped form bonds, provided escape from the chaos of Beatlemania, and inspired colossal leaps in songwriting and recording, but they also led to breakups, breakdowns, drug busts, and prison.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this book makes it clear that they're not glorifying it. And I'm saying they found a nice balance, like I said, with Trainspotting, Just one other thing with that. You can kind of trace the drugs that they were using. We know fairly well, so... Just bear with me. I've got like a timeline.
Right. Yeah, go for it.
Pre-1960, booze. 1960 to 64, booze, uppers, because we kind of know that Beatlemania was fueled by the Preludin, the Bennies and stuff, and whiskey.
Yes.
65, 67, pot and LSD, and coke, just Paul. 68 to 69, I guess they were all smoking pot through
I think it was throughout the whole, I mean, especially Paul.
Yeah. And then John... LSD, coke, and heroin. That's just John from 68, apparently.
Yeah, I think by that time George had stopped.
Maybe, but I'm pretty sure they all had weed in the house, but beyond that, Okay, so we're going to go drug by drug. Maybe the listeners, if you want to take them while we're talking, feel free. Right. Don't put the burden on us only.
Exactly. Yeah, no emails, please.
Yeah. So we kind of start with uppers, and we start with this thing of Royston Ellis, who is basically the English version of Allen Ginsberg, to put him in a box there.
Right.
And he stayed at Gambier Terrace, and what did he show the lads there?
Was it the Prellies?
No, it was the Vic inhaler.
The Vic inhaler, that's right. That's right.
In the cardboard strip, you could get Benzedrine. Yeah.
I wish, I shouldn't say I wish, but, I used to use inhalers back when I was in high school. I wish I had.
No one told you. No. Well, I thought it was hilarious that sometime later in the book, Richard Asher, Jane Asher's father, shows Paul that trick.
Exactly, that trick, yes, because he was a doctor, wasn't he?
Oh, weird.
Paul was probably like, well, then let me show you a trick. I'm sure.
Yeah, I've got a few tricks, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and then the paper strip, people used to dip it in alcohol or coffee, enhance productivity and creative discipline. So, again, people in factories use things which you might call speed or uppers. Again, it depends a little bit. They've obviously got amphetamines in them.
Right.
But, of course, Purple Hearts, that was one of the speed, and John made his comment about, thanks for the Purple Hearts. Yeah.
Right. So it's fascinating then, to hear how he would become more aggressive and confrontational, when taking these. I'll tell you, little story is, for a while I was taking testosterone because I went to my doctor telling him I was always fatigued and, did blood work and I was low on testosterone. And even though it's not considered a stimulant, it's the same kind of experience where, I felt like I was always in somebody's face, aggressive and not necessarily confrontational, but not afraid to speak my mind either, So as reading the book, I was kind of getting, a sense of, how I could relate to loss of appetite, taking these pills, because they were pretty much diet pills, I would you say.
Yeah, women's slimming pills was probably.
Yeah, exactly. when you get to the alcohol too, the Scotch and Coke, and which was, I think, they're probably their drink of choice throughout the 60s as well. And then this Black Velvets, which I still want to try, which is the Guinness and cider, which I really don't have any interest in trying it, but I probably will do it. Just once, exactly.
Yeah, amazing. There's this story of John when he was in Hamburg. I mean, we know he kind of really cut loose in '62 after Stuart was killed, or Stuart died, sorry. And it's this story that Paul had a girl in his room, and John was really wired, and he started cutting up her clothes. And he smashed a wardrobe as well. I mean,
and things like I think Epstein went down there for a visit, and he's passed out at the bar, and John pours a pitcher of beer over his head.
That's right. Yeah. Of course, in the book they say that uppers kind of fueled the Beatlemania period, but they say it's not so much a surprise, because they say from 62 to 64 they did 750 shows, 67 songs, TV and radio shows, interviews, photo shoots, tours of film, TV specials and pantomimes. So maybe
how do you not get through that? I mean, they didn't have energy drinks back then, or I mean, I'm not a big tea drinker either. I mean, is tea something that would give you a boost in the morning if done correctly, or
yeah? Well, there was a famous serial killer in England in the 50s, and I think in America a couple of serial killers, their drink of choice was whiskey, but this guy used to give his victims tea. I just thought it was very English, Talking about English stereotypes, this having afternoon tea at 4:00 is that's like 100 years ago. Yeah, we are tea drinkers. It's true. Yeah, things like amphetamines. If you take too many, you start to get jittery. And I mean,
right. And I think that's where that talk about the Red Bull too. I think that's how that made me feel at times. It's just really jittery.
Just horrible.
Yep.
Now there was this thing that Mark Lewison wrote about Prelly chats. And you heard this story about how John gave Brian pills because he wanted him to open up.
Right.
But yeah, I guess with these Preludin things, when you talk to somebody, you could get into a very, very deep discussion about something for a couple of hours. And I guess, Mark Lewison, do you remember in his book, he said, all the other Beatles, their best relationship was with John.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't say necessarily, because George and Ringo are pretty good friends, but I think maybe their deepest relationships were with John.
Yeah.
And I wonder if
think he was felt a little more sophisticated, because I think he was a little bit more upfront. He took chances. That was, another aspect that was so appealing about John.
He probably gave you more of himself as well. He probably revealed all kinds.
Exactly. Probably while he was, on these Prellys and booze and whatnot. Yeah, he definitely would let you in a little bit, especially if he trusted you.
Yeah. So I think this thing that I read earlier about help form bonds. There's no doubt about that. But then the late '60s was so chaotic. I mean, think about the Stones. Brian Jones just checked out completely. Keith Richards was described in Rock and Roll Circus as looking green by Pete Townsend.
There's a great, it's not great, but the Godard film, Sympathy for the Devil, I think it's called, and you see those sessions and you just see Brian, they don't even turn on his mic, and you just tell in his face and his eyes that he's, like you said, checked out.
He's gone, he's out of it. Yeah. All right, let's move on. Tobacco, I guess the thing that maybe I didn't know, I didn't realize that they pretty much all started smoking by the age of 12.
Yeah, I think my dad started earlier than that. My brother started earlier than that. And they've struggled trying to quit, all their lives. My dad stopped for almost a year not too long ago. And, soon he found himself smoking again. I see smoking harder to quit or cold turkey or quit than drugs at sometimes. You just see people just trying and trying. You hear all these stories about how they're just unsuccessful, stopping smoking. And, I think that's more harmful than, say, a weed or maybe LSD. I don't know. But just from my experience, seeing my brother and dad smoke practically all their lives. Yeah.
Well, also remember, as we were saying earlier, with when you buy drugs on the street, they're cut with all sorts.
Right.
Really, people put the blame on tobacco or nicotine, but it's really, there's about up to 100 carcinogenic chemicals in there,
Right, yeah, and it's just not drugs. It's food too, I think honey is cut with other products just because there's, just not enough bees in the world to, supply the demand for honey, so.
Yeah. I'll just tell you a really quick story again about legal drugs. I actually got into meditation, surprise, surprise, from Beatles. But I mean, I've been interested in it in a long time.
Right.
And I did a couple of, when I was in Thailand, I did a couple of silent retreats.
Okay.
And you spend 10 days, you don't speak. You get everything taken away, but it's very, very well organized. You don't feel like they're just trying to torture you or anything. But the food was vegetarian curries and soup.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So
love that stuff.
Yeah. So we were basically without, I mean, not only alcohol, but we were without all the crap, for want of a better word, that they put in food, the chemicals and everything. And I had an amazing experience. Like after the 10 days, I came out on the 11th day, and we were just in this small town in Thailand. And there was a group of us, and we decided to have a cup of coffee and a cake. So essentially, we had our first caffeine and sugar for 10 days.
Oh,
and
man.
I don't know if you saw that picture. I actually posted a picture myself.
No, I don't think I did see it.
Oh, God. I'll send it to you.
Yes, please do.
I've got these just absolute bug eyes. And I remember ringing a friend of mine when I came out. And my friend said, you were just babbling crap. You were just talking. And it wasn't due to the retreat, because when I came out of the retreat, I felt amazing. Like after 10 days, a natural high. But it was the caffeine and the sugar. And you don't realize, because you don't drink coffee, but maybe you drink tea, and you can't really escape sugar.
Oh, it's my downfall, really. I mean, I'm a vegetarian, but I like to say I'm a fat vegetarian because, Doritos are vegetarian, candy bars are vegetarian, So.
Heroin's vegetarian.
Heroin's vegetarian.
Yeah.
Well, I had kind of a similar experience. My diet is piss poor. In my 30 years of being a chef, you just don't sit down to eat. You really don't. We went to Sicily a few years back, and for 10 days, I did not have one single stomach issue like I would have here because of all the shit that we put in our food here. It's just because a lot of that stuff is illegal in other countries, but it just was a whole different experience. And then, like I said, 2 days after I returned, it was, back to stomach issues, just because of, the stuff we put in our food here.
Yeah, just amazing. Yeah. I think it's happening now in pretty much all countries, but I think there's degrees of it, I would say.
Right. And then, the meditation thing too, there's a funny thing, when George and Patty are in court from their drug bust, they had, used the excuse of, we're meditating now, so we don't need drugs.
Yeah.
As to use that as an excuse for the pot's there. Yeah. But we're not doing it anymore because we're meditating.
Yeah. And of course, what about that story of it? They busted him on Paul's wedding day.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, but not that they were invited to begin with. But
no.
Right.
But Patty's at the house. The policeman basically, not having a party, but they're listening to Beatles records.
We could probably get more into that in a little bit.
We will. All right, let's get going with this. So, yeah, the only other thing with tobacco and cigarettes was, of course, that we've seen the famous adverts of doctors promoting Luckies. It was actually in 1953 in England that the correlation was made between lung cancer and cigarettes.
So there were non-filtered cigarettes there then.
I'm not sure. The ones that the Beatles would have smoked, which would have been
filtered,
Woodbines, they were unfiltered. They were probably the worst.
Right.
But John never left that really, because he used to smoke those Gitan. I think they're unfiltered. I think. Yeah. Anyway, what about alcohol? So you're saying Scotch and Coke was their main drink.
Right. Which, again, I really have no interest in trying. I know Scotch is a whiskey, but I prefer something like that over Scotch. I think there is a distinctive difference in taste for that stuff, but it's just an aggressive thing. When you're on it, I mean, I think your whole attitude changes when you're drinking, especially when you're younger and you're in this atmosphere with gangsters and women of the night. You put on a new face, and you're a completely different person.
Yeah, it's a good story about the mafia bosses coming in and giving the Beatles champagne and saying, play. And they got no choice. Otherwise they get killed. Yeah, I think that's where the Prellies thing, I mean, I guess it was a natural evolution at some point. Literally couldn't play.
Was it Tony Sheridan that, I think it was Tony Sheridan that gave him the pills for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, he would have known because he'd been there, but I wonder if it happened organically with him, perhaps. I don't know. There is talk of them smuggling up some whiskey into India. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, could be. I think they probably smuggled a bit of weed in there because that would
that made more sense. Yeah. you would figure that they would, the Beatles, they're going to try to get away with anything that they can, especially when it comes to drugs or booze.
But I think the fact that John actually, I don't know if he actually felt suicidal in the sense that he was going to do it, but he said about Your Blues, I'm up there with God feeling suicidal. That would tell to me that he'd stopped self-medicating when he was in India. And that's
right.
a huge crash/withdrawal. So that tells me that he probably did go without.
Yeah. I find with John, though, his point of view, I think, changes a lot throughout the 60s and especially in interviews throughout the 70s, too. He could wake up and feel a certain way about a topic and then, 10 years later be interviewed about the same thing and just give you a completely different answer,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he had some kind of suicidal thoughts at some point just because of his past, childhood experiences.
Yeah, sure.
But, but go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we did a show with a therapist recently.
Oh, nice.
Which I was really pleased, because when I first started this podcast, I wanted to look more at the psychology angle.
Absolutely, and John Lennon's a great subject for that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this guy was saying that, I mean, he just reckoned from what he knew, just had so much pain. Something had to give. And Dan Richter was on my show last year. He lived
great.
with John Yoka for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Yes. He's a photographer, right? Wasn't he the monkey you see at the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey?
He was, yeah. Yes, he's the ape who throws the phone in the air.
Phone up in the air, yes.
Yeah, she went on Zoom last week because I wanted to ask him about his bit of this book.
Yes.
And it was hilarious because I was reading, Dan Richter did this and Dan Richter did that. Must be very weird to read about yourself in books, yeah.
Oh, man. Well, especially when drugs are involved, too.
Yeah. That's right, yeah. Okay, let's move on to cannabis or pot. So what I got from the book, used to make fiber, oils, and medicine for centuries. And, of course, there are a lot of hemp advocates out there.
Right.
Yeah, a big amount. And as I said earlier, may have been used by prehistoric Euro-Asian and African societies. Then it became a core component of American jazz in the 20s. It was banned in the 20s and the 30s. Have you ever seen the movie Reefer Madness?
No.
Oh, my God.
There's drug films I like, and there's drug films I really don't have any interest in seeing, to be honest with you. And the ones that deal with marijuana, I think a lot of times are just like silly, like the Reefer Madness, or there's a couple other ones out there that I can't think of at the moment. But I think of like Friday, Next Friday, those films like that. There's some truth to it, but I think that some of it's overblown as well, just to be funny.
I mean, Reefer Madness now, if you watch it, is laughable propaganda. Because they've got a guy who basically, I don't remember exactly, but something like he smokes a joint and then he wants to kill somebody or something.
These high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain. Innocently they dance. Innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell. In this film, you will see the ease with which this vicious plant can be grown in your neighbor's yard, rolled into harmless-looking cigarettes, hidden in an innocent shoe or watch case.
If you want a good smoke, try one of these.
You will meet Bill, who once took pride in his strong will as he takes the first step toward enslavement.
Of course, if you're afraid.
Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide, and the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity. Important film now, before it is too late.
And I go more with Bill Hicks. People in part, they organise to have a fight, and then they say, "Oh, should we do it tomorrow instead?" I'm a great lover of Bill Hicks, by the way.
Not only do I think marijuana should be legalized, I think it should be mandatory. Think about it, man. You get in traffic behind somebody. Shut up and smoke that. It's the law. Sorry, I was taking life seriously. Oh man, who's hungry? That'd be a nice world. Quiet, mellow, hungry, high people everywhere. Just Domino's pizza trucks passing each other. Let them get stuck in traffic. All our pizzas will be free, you see. I'm a dreamer, I'm a fucking dreamer, I'm a dreamer, Tommy. Pot is a better drug than alcohol. Facts! I'll prove it to you. You're at a ball game or a concert and someone's really violent and aggressive and obnoxious. Are they drunk or are they smoking pot? Drunk would be the one and only correct answer. Thank you very much. I have never seen people on pot get in a fight because it is fucking impossible. Hey, buddy. Hey, what? End of argument. It's kind of hard to hold a resentment when you can't remember them, you know. I'm supposed to hate you, but I don't know why. Forget it. Say you get in a car accident and you've been smoking pot. You're only going 4 miles an hour. It's just a better drug. I have never heard one reason that rang true why marijuana is against the law. Marijuana grows all over the world, serves 1,000 different functions. To make marijuana against the law is like saying God made a mistake. You know what I mean? It's like God on the seventh day looked down at his creation and he said, there it is, my creation. Perfect and holy in all ways. Now I can rest. Oh my me. I left fucking pot everywhere. I should never have smoked that joint on the third day. Shit. Boy, if I leave pot everywhere, that's going to give people the impression they're supposed to use it. Shit. Now I have to create Republicans. Everything they tell you about pot is a lie. Tell you pot smoking makes you unmotivated, a lie. When you're high, you can do everything you normally do just as well. You just realize it's not worth the fucking effort. Sure, I could get up at dawn, get in traffic, go to a job I hate that does not inspire me creatively whatsoever for the rest of my life. I could do that. Sure. Or I can sleep till noon. Get up and learn how to play the sitar. What is it, one string? How fucking hard is this instrument?
Good stuff.
I'm going to put some... Yeah, he died very young, only 33.
Yeah.
What about the link between, let's say, weed and creativity? Because this book I mentioned earlier, Out of It, I'll put a link to it anyway. It's a really good book. Clearly, like, you couldn't smoke a joint and then suddenly write, Strawberry Fields Forever out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. But I think there's no doubt. I mean, you can't possibly say that Rubber Soul is not informed somewhat by weed.
Right, and maybe a little bit of help. Day Tripper, as well, which, John has described as a drug song as well. When it comes to creativity, I think it's just more or less, the experience or the fact that you're doing it, which brought the creativity, like, turn me on when I get lonely. I mean, and got to get you into my life, and stuff like that. I get high with a little help from my friends. I get high when I see you go by. It's a double meaning, yeah, but they're also talking about the drug aspect of it.
Yeah, just jumping forward a little bit. Although I'm supposed to make this a bit more John Lennon, I'm fairly open to talking about other things. Do we know when Paul actually eventually stopped smoking cannabis, or could he possibly still be smoking it?
Yeah, I mean, he says he's completely done. I think this was in the early 2000s, especially when his youngest Beatrice was, after that. And I think, Heather was really against it. After drug bust after drug bust, he would jokingly say, you know, this is it for me, you know, I'm not going to do it again. He had to sign 2 pieces of paper that he wouldn't be doing it anymore. I think one was for the Japan bust, and another one was, I think, for the homegrown incident where, you know, he didn't know what the C's were. You know, he had to sign a piece of paper saying, yeah, he wasn't going to do this anymore. But I think it was, you know, the early to mid 2000s where he finally admitted that he wasn't doing anymore, just because A, of the youngest child, and B, you know, grandchildren as well.
Well, the ironic thing about it is that if you take the sort of image of the stoner, like if you've ever seen Harold and Kumar or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Right.
There's a movie with Sean Penn, I can't remember the name of it, where he's playing what's supposed to be a stoner. They're supposed to be kind of lazy.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High, you're talking about?
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. But the idea of being unproductive, of course, the criticism of Paul's solo career is that it's the opposite.
It's the opposite, and I think, again, that's the John Lennon angle, where my theory is that he doesn't have that John Lennon in his back pocket anymore. He deals with a lot of confidence issues throughout the 70s, and Linda has stated that, you know, numerous times, where he's just dealing with confidence issues. I mean, he's asking people, should I put this out as a single? You know, he had to be convinced to put Mulligan Tire out as a single because he just wasn't confident about it. So, yeah, I mean, it's a complete opposite, and, you know, I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, here, you know, he's so productive during the Beatles. I mean, he's productive as a solo artist as well, but the quality of the material may not be as great as the quality of material he did with the Beatles, just because of that John Lennon factor.
I think they say later in the book, one of the last chapters, is something about he couldn't make lyrical decisions when he was too high, you know, so he'd say, oh, yeah, is there a lyric about a salamander or something? Right. Just as one example, yeah. You might say, I'll keep that lyric about the salamander or whatever, you know? Yeah. So some combination of maybe smoking a bit too much and not having the other guy there. I think those two together, really. Yeah. All right. Okay, chapter 3. Now, this is by far the longest chapter in a book. Right.
It was never ending, wasn't it?
yeah, but quite amazing. I'm actually going to just read a couple of short extracts in a second. But some of the descriptions, I was going to say to the listeners, you could probably get high just by reading these descriptions a few times. They're quite astonishing. What I like in this book is that for each drug, he goes through the history of it. All right. So it's obviously that they're not just looking for gratuitous stories or anything. They actually want to inform us. And the famous story is Albert Hoffman, who's a Swiss scientist, and he was at the Sandoz laboratories in Basel, Switzerland. And in 1943, he accidentally absorbed it through his fingertips. So the thing with LSD, like, I was shocked to hear that John and some of the others had a bottle of liquid LSD.
Right.
Because if you spilled a bit of that on a table and you put like your palm in that and absorbed it in your whole palm, you might be like fucked forever.
Exactly, because it's so much. It's such a big dose.
Yeah, the doses are the general dose is so tiny.
Right, and when you're talking about your little sugar cube, which was, you know, how they were introduced to it, you know, a little drop of it on there, you know, as opposed to, you know, maybe a small puddle that goes on your palm.
So I mean, a small puddle on your palm, and you're probably checked out forever.
Oh, Sid Barrett all over again.
Yeah. Anyway, let me read some of this because this is incredible. You'd imagine this is 1967, but this is 1943, okay, during the Second World War. He inadvertently absorbed small doses through his fingertips. He later described being affected by a remarkable restlessness combined with a slight dizziness. At home, I lay down and sank into a not unpleasant intoxicated-like condition characterized by an extremely stimulated imagination. In a dreamlike state with eyes closed, I perceived an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes with intense kaleidoscopic play of colors. And there's just one other bit. And then he took it intentionally. This is still in 1943. Okay, he's not recording Sgt. Pepper.
Right.
The scientist during the Second World War. Little by little, I could begin to enjoy the unprecedented colors and plays of shapes that persisted behind my closed eyes. Kaleidoscopic, fantastic images surged in on me, alternating, variegated, opening and then closing themselves in circles and spirals, exploding in colored fountains, rearranging and hybridizing themselves in constant flux. He just, you know, he wrote Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds 25 years earlier.
Right. And he didn't have anybody there with him to, you know, talk him through the trip.
Yeah, well, the famous thing is he went out on his bike. He went out for a bike ride.
Right.
And, like, rode around for 4 hours or something. So, yeah.
I would imagine with something like LSD where you're knowingly doing it, you want to do it, and you're having a good trip, as opposed to someone like Cynthia Lennon, who disapproved of it, didn't want to do it, then eventually did it, and just didn't have a good time doing it.
I know you didn't know Cynthia Lennon. I met her once for about 5 minutes, but yeah. We spent the whole time trying to get Yoko into the conversation to see what her reaction was. I feel ashamed of it. I was about 21 at the time.
Okay, fair enough.
Just rolled her eyes. She didn't say anything nasty. Why do you think she would have such a terrible time? I mean, one opinion would be that she was straighter. I mean, that doesn't really mean anything, but...
Well, she's straighter in a way, but she's also losing John at that time, too. I mean, she's living through that whole experience when the Beatles first come on scene. John's not married. So she's dealing with all of this stuff. He's not home. She's raising the child by herself for the most part. So I'm sure she's seeing this as something that's pushing John away rather than bringing him closer.
And she may be experiencing that while they're doing the trip, right?
Exactly.
She might have all these kind of feelings about...
I mean, she said that, he was often unpredictable and obnoxious while on drugs.
Yeah. So going back to LSD, so in 1947, the Sandoz Laboratories put it out in pill form called Delucid. I'm not sure exactly what it was supposed to do for you.
This is why people should read the book, really, for those
we don't
reasons.
Want to give too much away. It said it was supplied without charge to research institutions in exchange for the data from their experiments.
Right, okay.
Interesting, yeah. And then I didn't quite understand, what they call the dental experience. Obviously.
Right.
John and George. It wasn't clear what happened because John Riley was their dentist and he obviously put LSD in the sugar cubes, but he said he didn't know anything about it or much about it. So it wasn't clear what he thought the effects were going to be. I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. But I think he knew of it, and you have, two Beatles there, whether or not his intention was to have, the orgy or not, after they took it. But the fact that they were kind of against, the harder drugs at that point in time, and then this being the drug that, introduced them to that, and then, in a way enjoying that experience. I mean, the author, Joe, does a great job in painting that picture, that experience. Reading it, and I'm like, oh, this had to have been a great time. It's the first time you're doing something like that. I remember my first time, smoking marijuana, and just that whole experience and the way I felt, and not hating it, and then obviously they didn't hate it. I mean, it was John and George that were the ones that really took on to LSD.
Yeah, they took a lot, yeah.
Lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD, is a potent psychoactive substance that is commonly classified as a hallucinogen or psychedelic drug. The effects of LSD vary substantially depending on the dose, the mood of the individual taking the drug, and the environment the drug is taken in. Some common effects include mental and physical stimulation, perceptual distortions, and generally positive mood states. Although we have some understanding of LSD's activity in the brain, it is not fully understood how this activity leads to the subjective experiences people have while taking the drug. Regardless, it is thought that LSD's activity at a subtype of serotonin receptor known as the 5-HT2A receptor, is critical to the drug's psychedelic effects. LSD acts as a partial agonist at the 5-HT2A receptor, which means that it binds to the 5-HT2A receptor and generates a response that is a fraction of what the natural ligand serotonin generates. LSD also interacts with other receptors, although the role of these receptors in the effects of LSD is less clear. For example, LSD binds to other serotonin receptor subtypes, as well as some subtypes of dopamine and adrenergic receptors. Research suggests that one large-scale effect of LSD on the brain is increased glutamate transmission in the frontal cortex, which is thought to play a role in the effects of LSD. Repeated administration of LSD over several days promotes rapid tolerance, where the drug has much less of an effect than it did initially. This tolerance is thought to be associated with the downregulation or decrease in number of 5-HT2A serotonin receptors. LSD is not, however, considered to be addictive, and although it is a potent drug, it is generally considered to be non-toxic and safe in terms of its effects on the body.
I'm pretty sure that John took it before he wrote Help or recorded Help, because you got the lyrics, I've opened up the doors.
Right.
And I mean, I kind of was thinking this before I read it, but makes you think of Huxley in The Doors of Perception. Yeah. And then August 65, they take it the first time willingly. This amazing time when it was Doris Day's house or someone, wasn't it? Something really,
like that, right. Someone famous.
What do we know about that?
We don't know because we weren't there.
We don't know. We've got lots of gossip.
Right, exactly. But again, I mean, taking it willingly and then learning the fact that it's best to have, somebody there to, help you, which I think is the thing to take seriously while doing something like this is, having somebody there that's not doing it and talk you through it. And, if you are experiencing something horrifying, kind of like Cynthia did. It's just you need somebody there to talk you through it. But I don't think it doesn't seem from reading this that, him or George had those bad experiences. They said that he had hundreds of trips and learning how to function as well while doing them.
Yeah, he must build up a tolerance whereby you can almost do it. But of course he did it in the Getting Better sessions.
Right, and then you see the transformation from, the 66, it looks like he's well fed at the time, and then to 67, mid-67 during those Sgt. Pepper sessions, and you read in the book how, they're on it and they're not eating. They take it, they go to a restaurant, and they wouldn't eat.
Did you ever suck any bad trips?
Oh, yeah, I had many. Jesus Christ. I stopped taking it because of that, I just couldn't stand it, I dropped it for I don't know how long, then I started taking it just before I met Yoko again. I got a message on acid that used to destroy your ego, and I did, I destroyed my ego, and I didn't believe I could do anything, and I let Paul do what he wanted and say, them all just do what they wanted, and I just was nothing, I was shit, And I was slowly putting myself together after Maharishi and that, bit by bit over a 2-year period. And then Derek tripped me out at his house after he got back from LA. He said, it's all, it's all, and he sort of said, you're all right, and he pointed out which songs I'd written, and you wrote this, and you said this, and you are intelligent, don't be frightened, And then next week, I went down with Yoko, and we tripped out again, and she filled me completely to realize that I was me, and it's all right, and that was it.
I mean, I know Albert Goldman's much maligned, but he came up with a good phrase in his book. He said, John during the Sgt. Pepper sessions looks like a Victorian watchmaker. It's quite good. He suddenly looks like 50 with these round glasses.
Right, glasses,
very intense. Well, that very intense look he's always got.
Yes, right.
There was just one little bit I wanted to read here. So John obviously got this book, The Psychedelic Experience, which is a Leary book, which is based on the Book of the Dead. I'm just going to read a little bit. So Lennon bought a copy of The Psychedelic Experience, taking it back to Kenwood. The book recommends that people record themselves reading aloud sections of the text personalized for their own needs to listen to while tripping. And it says, if Lennon recorded the first Bardo instructions, and we don't know he did, the section titled Instructions for Use, he would have read aloud more sentiments which found their way into his song. And this is referring to the fact that turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream was a paraphrase of the Leary book. So he would have recorded, oh, John, try and reach and keep the experience of the clear light. Remember, the light is the life energy, the endless flame of life. An ever-changing, surging turmoil of color may engulf your vision. This is a ceaseless transformation of energy, the life process. Do not fear it, surrender to it, join it. It is part of you. You are part of it. Remember also, beyond the restless flowing electricity of life is the ultimate reality, the void. That just sounds so cool. I love that.
Right.
Even you don't need to take LSD to be inspired by that, I think. And the void was also the working title for Tomorrow Never Knows.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of things out there during that time that you read now that I'm, really interested. Before, becoming an early Beatle fan, all I really cared about was, the music. As I'm getting older now, I find myself curious about, all right, well, how did Tomorrow Never Know come to be? Stuff like that. Day trippers. About day tripping. Just things like that. Are kind of fascinating to me right now.
But I think this passage I just read, it kind of proves that he wasn't just doing it to get wasted. He was generally looking for enlightenment.
How about a positive LSD story? Wouldn't that be newsworthy just once, to base your decision on information rather than scare tactics and superstitions and lies? I think it would be newsworthy. Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There is no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we're the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather.
I think with any drugs really, but particularly I would say maybe LSD and marijuana, because they have that ability to send you into a different place, but maybe intellectually I think some people would want to differentiate and say that I don't just take drugs to get wasted, I take them to get enlightened. I think John Lennon probably did it for both reasons.
Oh, I do, and I think
maybe
he also did it to heal his pain from his past, too.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
You know?
I guess heroin was the best painkiller, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Well, as we'll find out.
No.
Certainly. Yeah. Keep that in mind, listeners. Painkiller.
Right. The painkiller.
No, they did this trip in LA, and I mean, obviously we know about Peter Fonda and...
Yes, yeah, you know, I know what it's like to be dead. First, I think they were like, who is this guy? You know, why is he here? And yeah, I mean, those quotes from Fonda, I mean, it's a fun story, you know, and so...
But George said, you know, he felt the most concentrated feeling of all the positive feelings he'd ever felt.
George, I mean, I think he was able to verbalize his feelings about it best. It heightened his experiences. I mean, from my understanding, that if, you know, for some people, it might have been a good thing. I don't know. But the great interview with George that talking about doing acid, and he's saying, oh, well, you only need to do it twice. So the interviewer goes, oh, so you don't take it anymore? He goes, oh, no, I've done it 100 times. You know, but you only need to do it twice to get the experience, you know.
Is it George who talked about the tilt mechanism?
I think so.
When Ed Chen was on my show, he told me about that. They had a tilt mechanism where they knew kind of not to go over the edge. And I guess John went over the edge to some extent for a while, but...
Well, yeah, because then he had that whole Jesus issue. I don't remember if it was Shotton or not, where he's told him that he was Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And then, you know, he set up a whole board meeting, you know, and told everybody there that he was Jesus Christ. The one thing that, you know, disturbs me, too, is the whole him wanting to drill a hole in his head to relieve pressure, you know, or stress. You know,
try panning.
That's scary right there.
Yeah, I did it a few years ago. It wasn't... No, I'm joking.
Did you record the experience?
No, I didn't. Only in audio form. It's just me screaming. Were you aware that Paul had done LSD in December 65?
December 65, no.
Rather than autumn 66. Right. It was in the book, I was surprised. Yeah. But of course that puts a whole new slant on things, because that means that he'd done it when they made Revolver.
Right, and he done it without the other three. You know, I think his first trip was with someone else.
Tara Brown.
Yeah, right. You know, which would probably cause a little dent in the armor. But, you know, by that time, all four of them had experienced so much together already. You know, I mean, by that time, you know, I'm sure there was a little longing for separation, for experiencing things with other people as well.
Yeah, I know. It's so much of a big deal is made. I mean, the press are always going to do this, particularly the tabloids, about, oh, John makes How I Won the War. Oh, you're making a film without the other three. Oh, you're going to do that for a career. And he's like, no. You know, and people were surprised that they didn't hang out with each other all the time as well.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
oh, man,
exactly.
I just spent like 2 months on tour with these guys.
Right. And then, you know, going back to the Paul wedding, you know, none of them were invited.
They were above it. They were there spiritually. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so apparently, according to this book, Paul took it with Tara Brown. And then in 67, they talk about Brian having this party at Kingsley Hill in May. And I mean, they're doing it in John's Rolls Royce. They really went full on with this thing.
That's when they had Brian did it for the first time too, I think.
Around then, yeah.
Right.
So I think there was probably like a perfect moment where they were all on the same page.
Right.
But if you think about it, it's straight after the Summer of Love, everything falls apart. I mean, it's pretty much instant.
Right. Yeah. I mean, George has that bad experience in San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury.
Haight-Ashbury,
You know, and you definitely starting to get more and more dents in the armor, and, you know, and Brian's passing. And
I think with LSD, it's just not sustainable.
No, I don't think so. And you know, their look about them. I mean, John's, you know, his facial features as well while he's on. You know, there's a lot of pictures during that time of him, and, you know, he just does not look well at all.
I mean, the Sgt. Pepper, the party, which, as we know from the book, actually was the day that Brian came out of rehab.
Right.
But Brian had overdosed. The day of that party, there's a couple of pictures of John. I'll post them somewhere. And yeah, I mean, it's just unrecognizable. It looks terrible. And I guess you've seen the footage from the 14-hour Technicolor Dream. And he's clearly on LSD. I mean, we know he's on LSD.
Right.
And yeah, there's just something about it. I think sustained use just can't be done.
Right.
I think you get what you want out of it.
Yeah, you know, and that goes back to what you were saying earlier when, you know, you're on the park bench, you know, people watching. You know, I'm sure people are observing him, and, you know, just like, how is he alive right now?
Yeah.
You know, The one that really cracks me up, during this time is Paul's, interview that he gives, for taking LSD, where he's trying to convince the interviewer that he's the one to blame, for spreading the information that they are in fact taking LSD. If he would just keep it quiet, then there would be no issue.
You can see where the Russells came from.
Right.
They have to defend their drinking tea.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all pretty weird, isn't it? And I guess there's a feeling that maybe he stole the other guy's thunder.
Right, which, he'll do again in April of 1970. Probably still John Lennon's thunder,
We're talking about John Lennon. I mean, I have a clip of Mike Love talking about John around that time. So I think we'll play that.
During the Maharishi visit?
Well, no, he's talking about actually just before they met the Maharishi.
Okay, gotcha.
And Mike Love saying that he just looked dreadful. Anyway, so I'll probably put that clip in there.
Okay.
At one particular time, I felt he was very unhappy. This was just before they met Maharishi. I saw pictures of him in the paper, and I just looked in the paper and I said, God, that guy's really in trouble, or very unhappy. I felt sorry about him. I even looked at a picture one time and I felt that he's going to die or something. He just had this feeling somehow. And then they met Maharishi, and that feeling sort of cleared up.
And then John kind of went back to it when he came back from India.
Yeah, I mean, he had this time where he's just, he's totally flushed out, and then again just jumps back in, after, all this time.
Yeah. So he had kind of a binge period after India. I think it's, like I said, I think he'd been withdrawing in India.
Right.
Kind of had like a last hurrah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, he may have done mushrooms with Fred Seaman, if you believe Fred Seaman's book, but...
Yeah. Again, we weren't there, unfortunately.
Exactly. We're just gossiping.
Exactly. Again, one more thing about the LSD thing is, again, they described Lennon as listless and fatigued.
That's right.
Constantly. And we do get some interesting lyrics out of it. Obviously we get the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and that whole controversy, surrounding that, which again is just, more fuel to the whole experience of the Beatles in their drug years. I tend to believe that it had nothing to do with LSD. I know a lot of people would like to think that it had something to do with LSD, But Lennon was doing that at that time, taking things, whether it was a newspaper or the, being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, the Good Morning commercial, and turning them into songs. So, I mean, I definitely believe that over being about LSD.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's got Alice in Wonderland and fits in so perfectly with an idea of LSD, particularly English psychedelia. Oh, we didn't talk about drug songs. I probably won't get there in the end because there's so much to cover. I'm sorry.
Right.
One of them, of course, is White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane.
Of course.
Which has obviously got lyrics from Alice in Wonderland, but probably about LSD. So I think there's a bit of melding there.
Right.
I don't know if Lewis Carroll ever did LSD. Did he? Well, no, it hadn't been invented by then. All right, everybody, get ready. Oh, no, this is the Brian Epstein chapter. You don't have to take a Brian Epstein. All right.
Epstein?
You go first, yeah. Epstein, one of those.
Yeah, right. You hear a few things about him. I know Mark Lewison is treating Brian's story with a lot of care and detail, talking about him not fitting into this society where, we know he's a homosexual. It's against the law. He's trying to meet people, and, unfortunately there's times where he's getting beat up with people that he's meeting. He's meeting the wrong people. He's in love with a person that's stealing from him. So, I mean, that's a sad story as well. Talk about John's sad story. I think Brian was a sad story. He had to put on a face as well. He wasn't able to be, himself in public anyways. He was able to do it behind the scenes at homes and stuff like that. But definitely understandable why he would be addicted to, sleeping pills or whatnot. And then plus he's got the guilt dealing with I think he was a good manager, but he wasn't a great person to deal with when it comes to royalties and or merchandise, where, they were getting 10% of the royalties, where the people making the product were getting 90%.
That was a Celtai ad, wasn't it?
Yeah,
company that speaks backwards with the merchandising.
He brought them to America. He created those big tours for them where they're playing in, ballparks, but by then 67 by the end of 66, what else is there for him to do? He's really not doing much, so, he's dealing with his own personal demons at this time. great story where his ma comes to visit him, I think for a week or something like that. And all of a sudden everybody just notices the change in him, and he is suicidal. He has written a couple suicide notes. We find this because they were found after his death.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I do tend to feel for the guy, for sure.
I mean, he's almost like a Shakespearean character to me. There's something, a tragic Shakespearean character because he's, like you said, I mean, he's really got to be the face of it. I mean, because the Beatles, the advantage they had, like in 63, 64, obviously they may have had these Prellies or whatever to energy-wise, but they could be kind of a little bit outlandish, as long as they weren't too controversial in the beginning. But Brian's got to constantly put this face on, so he's almost like a performer.
Exactly. He's got several faces at this time because he's also, like you said, he's the face of the Beatles. I mean, you see him during interviews, you see his demeanor, really laid back, well-read. He speaks well, and then you get to see these interviews with the Beatles, and they get to be silly and charming and all of this stuff, and and Brian has to be reserved, and like you said, have this face on. It's interesting.
Yeah, and in terms of his drug. The things he did, I mean, he got into amphetamines in 62. They described Queenie Epstein as a pill popper.
Right.
Probably like legal stuff, but saying that a sort of propensity to take pills. And then John apparently had these sort of Prelly chats, as I was saying earlier, these talks. So they developed quite a deep relationship. But, he was into brandy and whiskey, which I guess would have been, with the gambling set. He was Lord Lucan, all those kind of people. It's sophisticated. But he got into cannabis. Then he got into LSD, and then he started on this uppers-downers cycle. And put in my notes here, we all do this, even if it's just a coffee in the morning and a chamomile tea at night. We're balancing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's written well in the book where people notice the changes and attitudes, throughout the day. Sometimes he wouldn't start until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Exactly. Going to bed right after dinner, and showing up at odd times throughout the day. Firing the whole staff, at one point.
And then bringing them back
Yeah, but, he was a successful person. He just wasn't really necessarily as business savvy as maybe, an Alan Klein was.
Maybe he was too nice. Maybe. He was too fair, too honest.
I'm sure he wanted the best for them, but...
Yeah. But, I mean, you see this awful change from 66 to 67, and I don't know if you've heard the interview with Murray the K that he did in 67. If you haven't, it's worth a listen.
Okay.
Murray the K is amazingly calm. He seems a completely different guy from the one in 64. Beatles, But it's a terrible story. He'd taken too many downers called Nembutal, and he was incoherent. He had to go and do this interview with Murray the K, and they basically
you're talking about, Brian Epstein.
Brian Epstein. Right. Oh, it's just horrifying. And he took 2 overdoses. He was in hospital. He was supposed to go and see John when he was filming How I Won the War.
Right, and wasn't able to because of the overdose. Right.
Didn't make it. And then did you read that bit about he sent a tape to John Lennon, and John Lennon played it for Pete Shotton?
Yeah, I mean, I read it. I don't read, but...
it's just a tape of... I put barely decipherable words and noise.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like moaning sounds. And
and what's John supposed to think of that, and what is Brian trying to say? I mean, is he trying to call him out for help?
I think it's a cry for help,
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about this, right? As we were saying earlier, there's lots of Beatles research and amazing books coming out.
Yeah.
We might find out that 50% of what we think happened didn't, or there's 50% more likely there's
more to it,
more that we don't know.
Right, exactly. And I'm sure we're going to get, with volume 2 and 3 of Lewison's book, I'm sure we'll probably learn a little bit more about Brian as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a good documentary made years ago by Arena, which is a series here in England. And his chauffeur talks about when they pump Brian's stomach. But he said another thing. He said some days he'd come into the car and he'd be really happy and he'd be really up. And other days he would just sit there and not say a single word. I mean, that's kind of got drug addiction written all over it, really.
Absolutely.
This idea of just being a completely different person on different days.
I'll tell you, I did worry about that man. Sometimes he would talk and chat. And he'd ask me about my kids and how lucky I was to have a family. That seemed to be one of his things that, I think, loneliness. For all, he's standing in the crowd, he was lonely. And of course he was shy, he was very shy. I mean, most of the blasé bit was acting. He's a very shy man. Yeah, he'd go on, talk about different things. And another time he'd be very, very morose and he wouldn't say a bloody word.
it says a lot about the individual too to stay and deal with something like that too. I mean, while I'm reading the book, I'm trying to put myself in these other people's shoes, and what would how would I be able to handle something like that? Would I be like more tough love type of thing? How would I handle that kind of situation?
Yeah, and obviously it came to a sad end, August 67. And as you said, 2 suicide notes were found to Queenie and Clyde.
Yeah, sleeping pills, something that I've never felt that I ever needed. Sleeping pills, so I don't know. I can't really talk about that experience or not.
I mean, I've certainly suffered from sleeplessness. I used to be
absolutely.
really bad insomnia. And I tell you, there's something horrific about going 3 or 4 days without a proper sleep. You feel like you're psychotic or something. Not psychotic in the fact that you want to harm other people. You just feel like you just enter this other world.
And you're in a void. I mean, you're just in a bad rut. I mean, I wouldn't say that I had bad insomnia, but there's times where, because I worked nights, I would be up until 7, 8 in the morning, maybe get 5 hours sleep and lucky, and do it all over again. Work, go out to the bar, have a few beers, and maybe watch a movie, pass out, and 5 hours later, you're up doing the same thing all over again.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's people who've had far worse insomnia than I had, but I did have a period quite recently, actually 6 years ago, and it really got to the point where I was just like, when am I going to sleep again? Like, when am I going to sleep more than 4 hours? And it wasn't to do with anything I was taking or anything. I was stressed about whatever I was stressed about, probably teaching, but no, it's really a horrible feeling. So,
Well, again, stress, like you said, stress is can really take a toll on your life. Especially when it comes to, lying down, it's quiet, thoughts start entering your mind, and it's really tough to shut that off.
So, I mean, doesn't surprise me at all that someone would take pills, particularly, of course, because they're legal and they're socially acceptable. Going back to the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Another thing I wanted to talk about actually was drugs and alcohol have been used a lot as inspiration for songs and films.
Right.
And I guess it's not really a surprise that that's the case, but do you want to go first? Have you got any drug songs? I haven't got any alcohol songs, but drug songs.
Yeah, well, drug songs are, I mean, it's just so many great ones, especially during the 60s and 70s. You got stuff like Pusher Man from Curtis Mayfield. I mean, the whole, Superfly soundtrack is just all, wrapped around drugs. Obviously, we mentioned Mother's Little Helper. You got that one, and if you take more of those, you'll get an overdose, towards the end, and another comic one, The Rainy Day Woman, Dylan. The two that really are powerful to me, Hand of Doom, Black Sabbath, lyrics like Push the Needle In, Face Death's Sickly Grin, Holes Are in Your Skin Caused by Deadly Pin,
Wow, that's not very subtle, is it?
No, it's not. And then, obviously, Neil Young's The Needle and the Damage Done, I caught you knocking at my cellar door, I love you, baby, can I have some more? The last line, but every junkie's like a setting sun.
Can I ask you a question? I haven't heard that song for ages. Is that quite a kind of mellow sounding song?
It's
quite the subject matter. Right.
Yeah, it's on his Harvest album, which is basically all acoustic,
God, what a contrast with Cold Turkey.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, but, that's a great drug song, too. Later on in life, I think it was 1980, he had, if you believe what Fred Seaman has said, that it's really actually about them getting sick after, having turkey the next day, after Thanksgiving or something like that.
Yeah, because I always wonder where that cold turkey thing came from. Like, I don't know the origin of that phrase. Do you know?
No, not the origin, but just the fact that people quit and they called it cold turkey. Shame on us for not Googling that.
Yeah, maybe cold turkey is the only thing you can keep down after you've been...
Right.
No. All right, I'm going to Google it. Fuck it.
Yeah.
Cold turkey. Bum, 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 bum. It may be that the original was a combination of cold, meaning straightforward, and the earlier talk turkey. Yeah, I'm not very convinced for that.
No.
It might be something to do with talking turkey. It might be like, because when you talk turkey, you just go directly to a topic. Maybe it just means I'm going to quit directly rather than stretching it out over weeks.
Right.
I just came up with that.
Good for you.
I don't know what I'm talking about. But. Yeah, I mean, heroin is... There's been a few good ones as well. The Golden Brown, if you know that, by the Stranglers. That was heroin.
No? Okay.
Yeah, it's an English band, and There She Goes. You may not have heard of the Lars. I don't think they made it in America, but Beatley Liverpool band in the 80s.
Okay.
And obviously heroin. You got heroin and Waiting for the Man by the Velvet.
Right. Yeah, Velvet Underground. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about LSD, marijuana? Must be lots of songs about tripping. And well, did we mention White Rabbit already or not?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and then you got the Lewis Lewis Carroll connection on that, and then, marijuana songs. I mean, obviously, you got whether or not Paul wants to admit it. I mean, high, possibly.
Possibly.
And you got and I Got High by Afro Man, which is comical. But I mean, these are generally songs that I don't necessarily seek out. I mean, we learned now that Got to Get You Into My Life was about marijuana. Pot. Yeah, exactly.
But then we found out that he'd actually done acid by the time he recorded that, so you never know.
Right.
I mean, LSD, there's quite a few. I just did a podcast with a Dylan podcaster. We did a John Lennon, Bob Dylan, and I was asking him whether he thought Dylan was into psychedelics and what Mr. Tambourine Man, he said that was probably pot rather than LSD.
No, okay. Yeah.
But then you've got, The Crystal Ship by the Doors, Tomorrow Never Knows, right. Obviously. There's a song called Muggles by Louis Armstrong. I don't know it. I know a few Louis Armstrong. So that's supposed to be about it. LSD, I think. Purple Haze, Rain, 8 Miles High.
8 Miles High, that's right.
Yeah. Why do you think it's such good subject matter? Do you think it's just because it's fun to make songs where you're kind of going out of the normal headspace? Or
yeah, I think so too. I think it's taboo subject back then, and trying to get away with whatever you can at the time. Let's see what kind of lyrics we can get into these songs.
Yeah. And then I guess when did Ecstasy become popular at the same time in the States as in the UK, do you think? I think the UK was kind of late 80s.
Was late, yeah. I think Ecstasy probably around the 80s as well. I mean, that's one thing you really don't hear much about. I think it's one of the second tier drugs. I mean, it was an afterthought. It was always, cocaine in the 80s was huge. You got this whole pot thing right now.
Yeah.
And then, you'll throw in LSD from time to time. But yeah, Ecstasy I never really heard much about here.
Oh, it's interesting because in England in the late 80s we had a thing called the acid house scene. Even though it's got acid, it wasn't about LSD. It was predominantly about ecstasy, and it was about obviously the rise of dance music. If you've ever heard of the Shaman or the Chemical Brothers or Primal Scream,
yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, I think they would have made some inroads in America, but I think even today, like a lot of British acts don't make it, over the pond. Maybe it works the other way as well. I don't know, but
right.
There's loads of good songs about ease, but they're all obviously very fast and repetitive.
Yeah. Wasn't there a band called Ecstasy as well?
Oh, I don't know. Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Not very subtle again.
No.
And then films. There's actually, just written down here, there's 3 films about alcohol that I think are really good as films.
Okay.
The Lost Weekend.
Oh, of course, yeah.
With Ray
classic,
Milland.
Yeah.
I think people still don't realize that The Lost Weekend was actually named because of that film.
It was the film, right, exactly.
Not because John went away for a long party or anything.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's silly when you look at it now. I mean, it's a movie that I love and, I do watch. And, it's 40s, but I mean, at that time, I would imagine that it was kind of shocking.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch Blackboard Jungle or High School Confidential, those funny ones from the 50s, they all seem a bit funny.
Right.
Days of Wine and Roses with...
Days of Wine and Roses, another great alcohol film. Another film that at the time had to have been a little shocking, as alcoholism is starting to come out in the forefront in films. In the mid to late 60s, you see a lot of filmmakers being a little more daring with the subject matter.
Yeah, so that was Jack Lemmon and Lee Remick. I always had a crush on Lee Remick my whole life. Yeah. From The Omen and the one Anatomy of a Murder was one.
Murder, yes.
And then Leaving Las Vegas. I'm not a huge Nick Cage fan, but I do like him in that film.
Yeah, that one was a great film about, alcoholism. I had that on my list as well. And the most memorable scene is when, towards the beginning and you just see him with the shopping cart and he just fills it full of bottles of booze.
Yeah, but he's also just drinking openly.
Yeah, just dripping it right out of the bottle. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I guess with alcoholism, you've got to guard against glamorizing it. But you've also, what I was saying about Trainspotting earlier, it didn't glamorize heroin in the end because their lives all fell apart, but it did show you why people do it. And I still say that's quite important because if you just make a film where someone's an alcoholic and they're just miserable for the whole film, then you're not going to try and understand why they're doing it in the first place,
Yeah, good point.
And it probably is fun for a while,
Right.
The point where it's the point where it's not actually doing anything for you. And then it just becomes... Right. Like you're saying, like second nature.
Second nature, or just being bored.
Like having a cigarette just because you need something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Habit.
Any other alcohol films you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, you came up with the one I was going to come up with Days of Wine and Roses. Good stuff. That Leaving Las Vegas Again. I mean, those are the two that really stand out to me. Star is Born. The lead male is an alcoholic and ends up killing himself at the end of the movie.
I've never seen any of those actually.
Oh wow, yeah.
Versions of those,
The one Judy Garland and Mason. I mean, that one's really good. Yeah.
All right. What about drug films? What have you got?
Oh, drug films. Well, for me, the most powerful and most disturbing, I think, would be Requiem for a Dream.
Oh, yeah.
You talk about, seeing reasons why they do it. I think that's a great one, especially the mom who's, wants to lose weight and she's on speed, and you just see this craziness that just unravels throughout the film. And especially the needle usage in that film too is just really, really tough to watch.
Yeah, it's visceral, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the most effective ones are like that one in Trainspotting, as I said. I think the ones that show the steady decline, that it just gradually,
right. Yeah, they think they have a control of it, and then it just continues to a downward spiral.
Very interesting. Yeah. I got some other ones. The Man with the Golden Arm. I can't take Frank Sinatra too seriously as an actor. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He's not too bad in some things.
Get your point there because he is the crooner. His old blue eyes or whatever you want to call him. But some of the musicals he did in the 40s and 50s are not really my cup of tea. But I think it was a big step in the right direction for him to be wanting to be taken seriously as an actor for doing that film.
It was good that it was made as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because especially like we talked about earlier, how the jazz musicians of the 30s, 40s, 50s really took a hold of heroin.
What else have we got? Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I love Hunter S. Thompson. He's my favorite journalist.
Wasn't that more like an acid trip throughout that movie?
I'm just talking about drug films in general.
Yeah.
I've just got a list. Some of the visuals in that, and obviously Terry Gilliam's the guy.
It's classic.
Crazy shit.
Right, and I just remember being a fan of his. Time Bandits is one of my all-time favorite movies, and just watched that movie so many times during a kid. And then you're watching all of his movies like Brazil and whatnot, and then you finally get to Fear and Loathing. I mean, it's almost mentally you're watching this and you're almost like, whoa, what the hell am I watching? And you kind of get, it's almost kind of like that contact buzz when someone's next to you smoking pot or whatever, and you get this contact buzz from that,
Yeah, the famous line is something like, "We just reached Barstow and the drugs took hold," or something.
Oh, and Fear and Loathing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were driving at the time or something.
Oh, man, Hunter S. Thompson, there's a character. What else have we got? Traffic. Traffic is a good.
Traffic's a great film as well. A lot of really good drug movies in the 90s on opposite ends of the drug spectrum, whether people are, the cops, looking for the people doing the drugs, or you got the, the addicts that are really doing the drugs. I mean, it's a lot of interesting stuff in the 90s for sure.
Yeah. Traffic was good because it was, Michael Douglas was the drug czar, right?
Right. And his daughter became an addict.
Yeah, was getting into stuff. And also the fact that she was very, she came from money, like she was privileged.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Just kind of smashing that thing that
and
drug taking has to be squalid,
Right. We were talking earlier about, both sides, the lower class where they're born into it, and then, the white privilege or, privilege and any kind of privilege really, dealing with the pressures of growing up in teenage years, school, trying to be successful. All of that.
Remember I was telling you earlier, I had Dan Richter on the show last year. I just Zoomed with him last week. I asked him if I could chat to him about some of the stuff in this book to see if it was true. The stuff with him in this book was more or less true because it was taken from his own book, which I haven't read, but I will get to. I asked him, could anyone become a drug addict or a heroin addict? And he said, yeah, the physical addiction is so strong that someone who's very well healed and well balanced could say, "Oh, that would never happen to me. That's got to be happening to these other people."
Those people, right?
Dan Richter was saying, "Look, forget it. If you were given it," and Paul said in the book, Paul had that sensible thing about him, but he said if he'd really enjoyed it, he would have become a heroin addict. Probably.
Exactly.
A couple of other ones: The Dazed and Confused, The Basketball Diaries, which is Leonardo DiCaprio. Up in Smoke, Cheech and Chong.
That again, as a kid, I'm like, what the hell are they doing? Why they got this huge thing, just, and then the Friday movies too, of course. The comedy ones really didn't do much for me growing up. I mean, they're fun, yeah, but the powerful ones like, Requiem for a Dream and, Traffic, I mean, those are the ones that really stick with you.
Well, I think the comedy has a great power to dispense truth, but it can also go the other way, because comedies and stuff is often loads of racial stereotypes, and I think the thing is that a lot of stereotype is quite funny. So I think stuff like Cheech and Chong is just solidifying this one idea of a stoner, or like Howard and Kumar, or the one, what was the one you said with Sean Penn earlier?
Oh, Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yeah. It's a very good performance, but it's solidifying it in that one thing. Like
was it Pineapple Express too, I think? Seth Rogen, I think, and Franco. Yeah.
James Franco, yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, but... all right. There weren't any more films, were there?
Oh, I'm sure there are more, but just...
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, ones that are handy.
Right.
Jesus, honestly, we could do 7-8 hours easily.
Yeah.
So there you have it. That was part 1 of 2 of Tom Hunyady and I reviewing the marvellous book, Riding So High, The Beatles and Drugs. Don't tell me you don't get bang for your buck there, considering that was all free. I do worry a little bit that it was such a long review, seeing as that's only half of it. We hope we're not spoiling too much of the book. I absolutely recommend the book to you. And Joe, if you're listening, I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll be sending you part 2 as soon as it comes out. So just a few takeaways really from the legal drugs aspect. Perhaps worth thinking about how drugs are part of all of our lives. And like I said earlier, food is a big thing. I think you should take John Lennon's advice from that first intro clip and really have a look at what you're putting into your system and how it's going to affect your mood and your energy. Our society is so focused on weight. I think we need to look at other effects of food. So next week, part 2 is going to mostly be looking at the cocaine and heroin chapters. I'm telling you, the heroin chapter will blow your mind. Again, we haven't given too much away, but some really amazing stuff. Just before I go, just to say, once again, Tom Hunyady's podcasts are 2 Legs, Paul McCartney podcast, and Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles videocast. I think I've got that right. And the book, as I said, Riding So High, The Beatles and Drugs. Joe Gooden's website is thebeatlesbible.com. There'll be links to all this in the show notes. Please subscribe. You can subscribe on iTunes or to the YouTube channel as well. I particularly request, if you've already subscribed to other Beatles sites, if you could subscribe to mine as well, then it really helps, because then my podcast will appear for people who've signed up to the other ones. It all helps. I'm just going to leave you after the outro music with another little piece of music. This is my one and only paean to The Herb. This was a song called Roller Up, which is a kind of an afterthought on one of my albums. It was a hidden track, quite badly hidden because the title was in brackets at the end, but it's another story. This is a short song, just one verse, and it's featured myself on acoustic guitar and vocals, Kester Jones on acoustic lead guitar, David Ernstberger on harmonica and backing vocals, Bruno Ragone on cajon. He also features on the regular outro song to the podcast as well, and a young lady called Victoria Rose on backing vocals as well. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back in, a week or so. So thanks for listening, take care, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.
So I wrote a fat one to take away my fears, but all it did was make me feel like I don't need a beer. transferred my paranoia, split myself apart. I hit the wall, dropped the ball, I was right back at the start.